Several years ago, I was on my way home back to Springfield from a job in Cincinnati. I tuned into 700 WLW and heard an interview with a man who had recently released his book.
And it was so dark.
It was called My Descent into Death, A Second Chance at Life by Howard Storm. It was an account of Howard Storm's near-death experience, which did not start out as the bright light and beautiful chorus of angels we have commonly heard about. Many interviews of Howard are available on the internet, but what amazed me is that most focused only on his near-death experience and left out much of his account from his book of his time with Christ and the angels. Howard has lost so much by becoming the man he is today. His first wife left him after the experience. He has terribly and painfully fractured relationships in his life as a result of his becoming a follower of Christ. No one exhibits his artwork anymore. His income is sparse, but he follows the path that God has for him. I met with him in his home this fall to talk about it all. But before I even get into his death account, I wanted to start out with the message that is most important for Howard that you hear.
When you think about it, I think rationally, why are people so offended by Jesus? You know, Jesus is arguably, but I think you can make a very convincing argument, probably the most influential individual that's ever lived on the face of the earth. I don't think it's hard to make that argument and make it convincingly. You know, he was poor, he never had an army, he never had any money, he was like, you know, and yet he's been the most, individual who's changed the world more than any other person, and like his whole message was about love. So why are people so hostile to him? What I want people to know is that if they want to know if there's a God, ask Jesus. If they want to know if Jesus is real, ask Jesus. If they want to know what to do with their life, ask Jesus. Matter of fact, everything you want to know and need to know, all you have to do is ask him. And if you ask him sincerely, and if you sincerely hope for an answer, you will get the answer. Because one of the things that he says, which is absolutely outrageous, is that, ask and you shall be given, seek and you shall find, knock and the door shall be open. And then, and people always miss this, and then he says, for it's the Father's will that he give you good gifts. So when he does his ask, seek, knock thing, A-S-K, ask, he qualifies that as being only for good gifts. So if you are asking for a BMW, he's pretty much guarantee you he's not going to give you one, because he's got something way better than a BMW to give you.
Before you can understand the man that Howard is now and appreciate the message he wants to share, you must have an understanding of who he once was and what happened to him. It is both necessary and appropriate to include his account of his descent into hell, and not just as a backstory, but as a frame to the living salvation he received while there. So I invite you to go beyond what simple morbid curiosity might call you to limit yourself to, and continue beyond his account there to find out the amazing story and plan of love that awaits us all.
When I was around the age of 15, I came to the conclusion that the little exposure to Christianity that I'd had as a child and an early teenager was all a lot of hypocrisy and nonsense, and pretty much believed that what I had experienced was a show that nobody believed in, nobody practiced what they talked about as their belief, and that I didn't want to participate in that anymore. Probably the only thing that I took away from my religious background as a child was that it's better for us to be good people than bad people. And also there was, society had built-in consequences to bad behavior, which I didn't want to experience. Like, I did not want to go to jail. I didn't want to go to prison. And so I was socialized enough that I would get away with what I could get away with and make sure that I never got caught. The only reality was the reality that I basically invented on my own. The only moral standard was the moral standard that I decided for myself I would obey. I was an existentialist, Nietzschean, God is dead, I'll do what I want to do, life is meaningless, and I would try and experience as much pleasure as possible and avoid pain as much as possible. A hedonist, a complete nihilist, didn't believe in anything. All of my friends were of the same kind of mind. So in '66, my new wife, at the age of 18, we went to San Francisco because we heard that was like, there was something happening there. And to our delight and surprise, it was more than we had ever imagined. It was just like incredible. Relishing in the hedonism of San Francisco, which we participated in to a certain degree. Came to Kentucky in '72 to be an art professor. I was very successful as a professor. I got, after 3 years at the university, I got tenure and became a full professor in my 20s, which is unusual. I had 2 galleries exhibiting my work. I'd won a big award from the state of Kentucky as Sculptor of the Year. And my goal was to become a famous artist and to experience as much of life as possible and as much as I could possibly get away with without suffering the consequences. I drank heavily, was just a completely manipulative, egotistical, driven person. And as long as people didn't offend me, I was pleasant to be around. If someone offended me, I had nothing to do with them and wished them as much harm as possible. I was on a art tour with a group of students around Europe, and we were on the next to the last day of the trip, and we were in Paris, France. And at 11 o'clock in the morning, I had a perforation of the small stomach. But when it happened, it was completely unexpected and took me to the ground. So the doctor came to the hotel, knew what was wrong, told me that I had to have surgery right away, called an ambulance. The ambulance took me to the Hospital General d'Assistance Publique de Paris. Instead, they put me in a room and told me that they were getting a surgeon. The pain that had taken me to the ground, kicking and screaming, and making me feel like I was going to lose my mind, the pain was so overwhelming, got much, much worse. And I was pretty sure that this was coming to a conclusion. The nurse came in and said that they were unable to find a doctor and they would try and get one the next day. This was at 8:30 that night. And I'd been to this for 9.5 hours. And when she left the room, I knew that for a long time, for several hours, I had been living from moment to moment, trying not to die. And now I knew it was time to let it happen. I'd resigned myself to dying. Said goodbye to my wife, told her to tell my kids that I loved them, etc. And she cried. She sat down and I closed my eyes and went unconscious, which is what I wanted. With absolute certainty that that would be my last sensation, my last thought. Realized that I was standing up. That was my first conscious thought, was I'm standing up, and I opened my eyes, and there I was standing up in the room that I had been, right next to the bed that I had been lying in. And my second thought, other than being conscious and having my eyes open, was that the pain wasn't there anymore. I was pain-free, and I was happy. I was so excited about that, and then I began to realize that not only was I pain-free, but I felt better than I'd ever felt in my entire life. More alive, my senses were heightened. I was trying to do a reality check, and the thing that I realized is that my senses were greatly heightened, and that reality was much more intense than it had ever been. I could feel all the little bumps and lumps and cracks in the linoleum. Because I was a visual artist, I was very keenly aware of things like my depth of field was 100%. I could, when I looked at something close, like my hand, I could see the foreground in complete focus. I thought that was weird. And then I became aware that instead of my field of vision, which is normally 160 degrees for people, I realized that my field of vision was pretty much wrap around 360. It was all very weird. I did things like pinch myself and bend my fingers to see what that would feel like, and it was like, What I knew was going on is that I had awakened to be more alive than I'd ever been in my entire life. I saw the bed that I'd been in, and there was a body in it. And when I went and looked at the body in the bed, it looked like me. But I refused to believe that that was me, because I was not only alive, I was more alive than I'd ever been, and there was this cadaver in the bed that looked like me, but that couldn't be me. So I just refused to believe that that was me. I actually, trying to explain to myself how that was not me, I came to the conclusion that they had made a mannequin of me. My only conclusion was this was the French hospital's attempt to make me think I was crazy. So I tried to communicate with my wife, I tried to communicate with my roommate. They didn't respond to me at all, which made me very angry, because I was yelling and screaming at them. What's going on here? You know, what's happening? You know, what are you doing? You know? And I got no response to them, and I assumed that they were trying to ignore me, to make me angry, which made me more angry. So I heard people outside the room calling me by name, so I went over to the door of the room to see who these people were, and they said, "Hurry up, let's go, we've been waiting for you." And I said, "Well, I'm sick, I need to have surgery. I've been waiting for hours for a surgeon." And they said, "We know all about you." I went into the hallway. The hallway was creepy, shadowy, gray, and the people stayed back in that grayness. It was pretty evident to me that they didn't want me to get too close to them at that time. They didn't want me to see them clearly. But they were all adults, male and female, and everything was just gray. They were gray. So I went with them. They encircled me and led me what at first I thought was a hallway, which turned out to be space without any definition, no walls, no nothing except the surface that we were walking on. And we walked and walked and walked. And you know, all rules of physics of this world are no longer applicable in that world. So when people ask me how long I walk, I say, well, it'd be like walking from here to Dayton or something. That kind of a walk. Long time. The weird thing was no sense of time. That was very, very disturbing part of it. And I never felt any fatigue, but it felt like we went that far. In this journey with these people, they became increasingly more hostile, and I was getting really afraid. The only problem was it was getting darker and darker. I had no idea where we were going. I had no idea what the direction was. There were no landmarks, nothing to orient myself with, so there's no way, like, I kept thinking about how do I go back, but which way was back? I mean, if I turned around, was that back. They became scary enough, and it was so dark that I said, I'm not going with you any further. I mean, the only thing I could do would be to refuse to cooperate, which I did. And they said, you're almost there. And so they started to push and pull, and I fought them off as best I could, which was completely unsuccessful because what had been a small group had grown as we had journeyed more and more and more, joined the group. So now I was in the midst of a mob of indeterminate size. It might have been hundreds or more, I don't know. And they were indoctrinating me into their world. It's best defined by what wasn't there, which is a world of hopelessness, a world of lovelessness, a world with no light. These were people. They weren't demons, they weren't monsters. They were people who had lived in this world, who had lived the same kind of life that I had lived. And they were familiar to me, unfortunately. I mean, I hate to admit it, but they were my soulmates, because these people who had rejected God had, sadly, in their rejection of God, rejected everything that God gives us that we take for granted. And God gives us love, God gives us joy, God gives us light, God gives us hope, God gives us the creation, the world, and in their world, all those things are absent. All they have is their existence themselves, which is what they had lived for in this world, for their own self-gratification, and the company of people they were with ended up being basically people seeking to dominate and torment one another. They're sort of emotional vampires in a way, and I always use the prison term, the new fish. People in this world are curious about that, and I am not going to satisfy their curiosity except to say that there has never been a horror movie or a sadomasochistic imagination that can imagine what they do, because this is all they do. And I'm also aware that this was just one tiny aspect of the afterlife. I came to the conclusion that people who lived crummy lives went down the toilet bowl of the universe into the sewer, and that I had lived a crummy life, and I had ended up in the sewer with all my other fellow sewer rats, and we were going to go deeper, because if you're familiar with septic systems, what the real activity in the septic system is deeper down in the cesspool, and that what they were preparing me for was being rendered down into deeper states. It was a terrifying prospect, and certainly something that I didn't want to be with them. I didn't want to go with them. I didn't want to go deeper. Oh, I felt absolutely that there was no way out. This was it. Eventually, I was no longer entertaining them, and because I couldn't respond anymore, so I was just lying there, completely ripped up, destroyed physically, and more importantly to me, destroyed emotionally, psychologically. Lying there on the ground, people kicking me and getting no response from me at all anymore. I was too spent to moan or groan or complain or anything. I heard a voice that sounded strangely like my own voice, and I don't know where it came from, but it didn't come from me, but it said, "Pray to God," and I thought, I don't pray, I don't believe in God. And the voice said, "Pray to God," and I thought, I don't know how to pray. I don't pray. The voice said, "Pray to God," and I thought, when I was a kid, When I was a little child, I'd prayed, but I don't remember what I said. So I tried to remember what I had been taught was prayer, which were bits and pieces of things that I memorized, and it was all confusion in my mind from things that I memorized, from the Pledge of Allegiance to the Gettysburg Address to, you know, Shylock's Merchant of Venice speech, and all this stuff, and then some phrases from 23rd Psalm and the Lord's Prayer and Battle Hymn of the Republic started coming to mind, and I unintentionally murmured some of these things, and when I did that, the people around me became very, very angry, and they said to me in language which I won't try to imitate because it was very obscene, was, "There is no God, nobody can hear you, and we're going to really hurt you for doing that." But it encouraged me to begin to try and recall and speak things that had mention of God in it, because for the first time in all of this time I was able to repel them. It drove them away from me. And they were retreating back in the darkness, screaming and yelling at me. And my mind, not something that I was consciously seeking, but my mind was looking for some way to bail out of all this, when it came up with the memory of me as a child in a Sunday school classroom singing "Jesus Loves Me." The memory was both, I mean, I could see myself in a little chair in a Sunday school classroom singing, but the important thing about the memory was that I felt in a detached way what I had felt as a child, which was, Jesus loves me. Oh, and 100% total confidence, certain, yeah, there's this guy named Jesus and he loves me, and that when I was a child I'd prayed to him and felt that he had protected me and watched over me, that he was a really good person, without any intellectual understanding or creeds or doctrines or anything, you know, just a hope, and not even knowing whether the hope would be legitimate or not. I called out into the darkness, "Jesus, please save me." And when I did that, a tiny light appeared in the darkness and got very, very bright, very intense, very quickly. Out of the light came hands and arms and reached down and touched me, and when he touched me, in this light I could see that I was just gore. And when he touched me, all the gore just kind of began to disappear very rapidly, and I became whole. And the hands went behind me and picked me up to him, and he embraced me. When he touched me, in addition to the physical healing, instead of what I was feeling at that time, I was filled with his love, and it was a much more intense experience of being loved than anything I'd ever known in my entire life. And I don't think that there are any words in this world to begin to convey how powerful that love is. And it's love with acceptance too. I mean, I didn't feel love in a sentimental sense. I felt like, you know, totally accepted by him. He had his arms around me, and I had my arms around him, and I wept for joy, holding on to him, and he started to carry me up out of that world of darkness and despair. And as we began to move, I knew that we were really moving. We were going very, very rapidly, like a rocket. So I'm hanging on to him real tight because I don't want to get dropped and fall back. Like, you know, just basically, wow, amazing, unbelievable, this is great. And then as we're moving, I wanted to see where we were moving towards, and as I looked up in the direction that we're going to, I saw a world of light. And as I looked at the world of light, I all of a sudden was like, oh no, God lives there. That world of light is we're going to God's house. And I have spent all of my adult life saying, there is no God and there is no heaven, and now we're headed there. I am such a piece of filth. I'm such a piece of garbage. He's made a terrible mistake. Jesus said to me, spoke to me for the first time, and he said, we don't make mistakes. You do belong here. And when he said that, we stopped moving. So there we are, me holding on to him holding on to me. And I suddenly realized he had heard what I had thought, because I hadn't said anything. And I had heard what I couldn't read his mind. He was putting his words into my head in his own voice. So I thought, do you know what I'm thinking? He said, I not only know what you're thinking, I know everything you've ever thought. And I thought, I'm really uncomfortable with you knowing everything I've ever thought. Because I was thinking of like all the times, like as a teenager, sneaking off to the bathroom to relieve myself. You know, things like that, you know, like all the times I'd thought about people I'd like to break their neck, you know. All of a sudden had a very vivid image of a naked woman. And he started laughing. And because he could see what I was thinking, and he just thought that was so funny. And I said, this is not good. I'm thinking, if you know everything I'm thinking, I can't hide anything from you. And he said, well, you know, I know it all. I know everything. And so, if you know everything, I knew that he liked me. You know, I knew that he really liked me a lot and he really loved me. And I thought, well, if he knows it all and he's so fond of me, I guess it's okay. You know, sort of like, you know, I guess he's my best friend, you know, kind of thing. So we were conversing by me thinking and him speaking to me, and he said that he had people he wanted me to meet, and so he called out, and some other beings of light came and were hanging in space around us. And what he told me was that they had recorded my life and they wanted to show me my life. And I thought, oh, that sounds like a lot of fun. So we started to watch my life, and it was being displayed in chronological order, and it was very interesting what they chose to show and what they chose not to show. And as time went on, it wasn't so much fun, because as we went from my childhood into my more teenage years, I started to see a lot of problems develop, which I was participating in. Like my relationship with my father was deteriorating from bad to worse, and I was becoming more and more alienated from everybody and everything, sort of withdrawing into my own little bubble as a form of self-defense from emotional harm, and becoming more and more manipulative in terms of wanting to get what I wanted. And I made Jesus and the angels very sad. And there's a common saying in Christianity, you know, love the sinner but hate the sin. That's exactly, precisely what I was experiencing. I always felt that they loved me and cared a great deal about me, but they didn't like what I was doing in my life, because the bottom line was, it was harmful to me. Everything that I saw as me being the victim of, everything that I could rationalize and excuse myself for doing, was of my own doing and was basically self-destructive. Like one of the examples of how he wanted to show me how I should have lived or could have lived was, I was a teenager. My father went into I had an older sister, 2 years older than I am, and he went into a room and beat her very severely. And I lay in my bed, this was late at night, and listened to it and did nothing, which I was so ashamed of. I wanted to do something, but the problem was that I knew that if I went in there, I'd kill him. And then it stopped, and he laughed, and she was in there crying. I went into my sister's room, and I climbed into bed next to her, which I'd never done in my life. I mean, the thought of being in bed with your sister is like disgusting. I climbed up and I put my arm around her and held her. And her crying got less and less, and she fell asleep. And I was still awake, and I thought, I better hold on to her. So I just held on to her and fell asleep too. When I woke up in the morning, she was still sleeping. I scampered out of there because I didn't want her. I was kind of horrified by the fact that I'd spent the night holding my sister. But she just said, no, that was beautiful. He was very happy with that. So after we went through my life review, and he had completely ignored all the things that I had done that I thought were my achievements in life, and instead had shown me of all of my lack of response to other people. I was very unhappy with my life review, and he asked me if I had any questions, and I said, I've got a million questions, and he said, go ahead and ask whatever you want.